News about our neighbours now. In the movement for Democratic Change and Zimbabwe, trade unions are planning widespread protests this Friday. Now, this is an attempt to counter austerity measures and to launch a new currency. The protests come over a year since Emmerson Mnangagwa won a closely fought election in which he promised investment, transparency and a better Zimbabwe for all. Well, similar protests earlier this year led to the deaths of 13 people, with hundreds beaten and many women sexually assaulted. Ngobizita Mlilo is a human rights lawyer and MDC NEC member joining us in studio to discuss this. And Ngobizita, good evening and thanks for your time. Firstly, I'm wondering, is this a good idea to have such a protest on Friday, considering what happened the last time?
It is always a good idea to fight for the rights of Zimbabweans and to fight for people who are living under a repressive state, a dictatorship, a vampire state, a state that prides itself with killing innocent civilians who are unarmed. The MDC is a product of the grievances of the people of Zimbabwe. So the formation of the MDC represented a certain stage of the consolidation of the grievances of the people of Zimbabwe. July election of 2018 represented the most brazen of stolen elections. Mr. Mnangagwa stole an election. Advocate Nelson Chamisa, the president of the MDC, won that election, and that victory was stolen from them. So you are now seeing in Zimbabwe a consolidation of an illegitimate regime which is consolidating its military apparatus. So Zimbabwe basically is a military state. So this protest is an attempt by the people of Zimbabwe, represented by their legitimate leadership in the MDC, to return the country to normalcy and to legitimacy.
I'll tell you
what this protest is about.
I'll tell you what worries me is that we, just last month hearing from senior ZANU-PF officials saying the Constitution allows the government to deploy the army to confront protesters, and they're warning that soldiers are trained to kill, saying forewarned is forearmed. Now, I have to wonder just what's being done to protect protesters. Yes, you have the right to do it, but considering what we saw happening, considering that this is the kind of sentiment you've seen just a month ago,
So that's the
should they brace for the worst on Friday?
Yes, that's the point that we are making, that we are living in a military state, we are living in a dictatorship. The very idea that ZANU-PF speaks about the deployment of the military when civilians were unarmed, who have already indicated to the people of Zimbabwe that we intend to have a peaceful demonstration, we are unarmed, and you have a response from an exhausted nationalist movement that speaks about the deployment of the military. This is the grievance that we are speaking about. And we request that the international community, and in particular our brothers and sisters on the African continent, to see these ZANU-PF and the military regime for what they are, a vampire state, people who are designed by nature and fate, that theirs is to kill the Zimbabweans.
Enlighten us about these austerity measures and plans for a new currency.
Well, the issue in Zimbabwe is that you are having an illegitimate state. You are having an illegitimate man in the name of Mr. Mnangagwa who stole an election. So the state is illegitimate. It has no capacity, no ability to solve the economic problems that we have in Zimbabwe. So the problems that we have in Zimbabwe are inherently problems that arise from a contested legitimacy of the incumbent. So absent a resolution of the legitimacy question about the leadership of the people of Zimbabwe, you will not be able to solve the economic problem. So these issues about austerity, the currency, are simply symptoms of a bigger problem, which is return the country to legitimacy. So when the MDC calls for a protest, what we are saying is that we must return the country to legitimacy. There must be a dialogue, and that dialogue must lead to the establishment of a national transitional authority which returns the country to legitimacy.
Okay, so I'm a little confused at this point. So there's no direct issue with a new currency, for example, or just these austerity measures. Is it about the regime that's bringing them?
It is to say any economic problems that we are facing, any social problems that we are facing are a symptom of a bigger problem. And that bigger problem is that the country is being run by an illegitimate state. The country is being run by a military junta. Let's return the country to civilian rule. In any event, the struggle for national liberation in Zimbabwe was about the freedoms of the Zimbabwean people and their ability to prosper in a democratic Zimbabwe. So this protest, in essence, is that we must return the country to legitimacy. So the MDC went to a national congress and said that we must exert pressure for the purposes of creating conditions for dialogue, which dialogue would then lead to the creation of a national transitional authority, which would lead to reforms, which reforms would then lead to a free and fair election.
So what do you see as changing after Friday? I mean, it almost sounds to me like you're hitting your head against a brick wall.
That's a fair comment. That's a fair comment. And that is the pains of wishing to wage a struggle for democracy and a struggle for freedom by peaceful and non-violent means. We have committed ourselves since formation to the creation of a democratic Zimbabwe through peaceful and non-violent means. Even here in South Africa, during the struggle for national liberation, the African National Congress, as the representative of the majority of people, sent deputations to Europe and everywhere else in an attempt to create conditions that it was not necessary to go into an armed struggle to cause liberation to happen. We are still at that stage where we feel it is still possible to achieve a democratic Zimbabwe through peaceful and non-violent means. But this question you are posing begins to question whether or not the method we are using to achieve this democracy are enough. And we hope that we don't reach that stage where it becomes necessary to take up arms to fight this regime. For present purposes, we are committed to a non-violent struggle. We are committed to bringing a democratic Zimbabwe through peaceful and non-violent means, notwithstanding the provocation that we are receiving from ZANU-PF. So on Friday, our people will be on the streets, unarmed, calling for the return to the country to legitimacy. The military must stay in the barracks. The country must return to civilian rule. Zimbabwe must not be a military state. Advocate Nelson Chamisa won the election in Zimbabwe. It is necessary that this country gets to a dialogue which is all-inclusive for the purposes of restoring the country to legitimacy.
Somehow I feel we're not going to see the military staying in the barracks, but I'm really crossing my fingers that we're not going to see the bloodshed that we saw earlier this year. We wish you all the luck with that protest. And I suppose everybody, the world waits, praying for things to get better for people in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much. And